had always considered my neighborhood a safe little bubble. Tree-lined streets, neighbors who waved politely, kids who played in front yards while their parents sipped coffee on patios. It was the kind of quiet suburban life I dreamed about when Mark and I bought our house. But now, standing in my kitchen with my hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold, I felt that bubble bursting in slow motion. Claire had bought the house next door, my husband's work wife, the woman whose name I had learned to hate without a single confrontation. The news came like a punch I hadn't seen coming. I was scrolling through my feed, trying to ignore the tight knot in my chest that had been growing ever since. Mark started mentioning Claire more often, ever in a negative way, always casual, like talking about a coworker who happened to be the only other person who got him. And then it was there, a cheerful post with a picture of a sold sign in front of the very house I had walked past every morning, imagining my life unfolding there. And in the caption, casually thrown in, as if it were an afterthought, was her signature smiley, "Can't wait to be neighbors, Samantha." So excited for our little community to grow. I remember dropping my phone onto the counter, the clatter startling me. My heart raced, my stomach twisted. That sick feeling, the one that comes from knowing the person you've silently hated is now moving into your literal backyard, settled deep in my chest. It was almost funny, in a horrifying way. Like some cruel sitcom had scripted this moment just to watch me unravel. I pressed my hands to my face, inhaling shakily, trying to tell myself I was overreacting. I was not overreacting. Not really. Mark walked in at that moment, humming softly, and the sight of him completely oblivious made my blood boil even more. His brow furrowed when he saw my expression. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice soft, concerned, totally clueless. I shook my head without speaking. The words wouldn't come. How could I tell him that the woman he smiled about in casual, innocent tones was now planting herself permanently into my life, next door, grinning like she'd won some private victory? "Claire bought the house next door," I finally said, my voice tight and brittle. The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth, like admitting a secret I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Mark's brow shot up. "Oh, that's nice," he said slowly, still smiling like she'd just invited us over for cookies. "Nice, nice." My chest constricted with frustration, a flare of anger shooting straight to my throat. "Going to be our neighbor?" I added, the words tasting like ash. "It's not nice." Mark laughed nervously. "Well, maybe she'll be a good neighbor. Friendly, you know." He didn't get it. He didn't see the undercurrent I did. He never did. And I hated him for it. Not entirely, but enough that my hands itched with a desperate need to grab something, anything, and release it. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, the walls closer, trapping me with my racing thoughts. Claire had always been something too charming, too quick with compliments, too persistent in her casual invasions. Work lunches, shared projects, messages that Mark never thought twice about. And now she was moving in, placing herself right in my line of sight every time I looked out the window. I imagined her waving, bright and insistent, wearing that same knowing smile she always wore. And it wasn't just a smile, it was a weapon. Every glance, every casual wave, carefully calibrated to remind me that she was there. And Mark liked it that night. I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the ceiling tiles in an attempt to distract myself from the spiraling storm inside. I could see Mark in his half-sleep, his chest rising and falling steadily, unaware of the war quietly erupting in my mind. I kept thinking about what Claire's presence would mean, small invasions that would stack into something unbearable. Borrowing sugar, dropping by unannounced, friendly chats that lasted hours. Every little thing she had done in the past, multiplied and permanent. And worst of all, the way Mark would laugh them off. The next morning, Claire made her first move. I had just stepped out to grab the newspaper when I saw her in my driveway, holding a potted plant like it was a peace offering. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, the kind of effortless that made you want to throw your hairbrush across the room. She smiled at me in that way, open, warm, entirely fake. "Good morning, Samantha," she chirped. "I just wanted to stop by and introduce myself properly. I hope I'm not intruding." My throat tightened. I forced a smile, the polite kind that felt like sandpaper against my teeth. "Morning, Claire. Nice to see you settled in." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "Oh, you'll be seeing a lot of me. Mark told me what a wonderful neighbor you are, so I can't wait to get to know you better." There it was, the subtle jab, disguised as compliment. She knew exactly what she was doing. I felt my hands clench at my sides, and then she dropped it. The bomb. With an innocent tilt of her head, she smiled like a saint. "Actually, I just found out I'm pregnant. Mark's going to be thrilled when he hears the news." The words hit me like ice water. My knees nearly buckled. My chest felt hollow, my stomach twisting. I could see her hand brushing over her slightly rounded belly, the gesture claiming space in a way that was infuriatingly precise. Pregnant? I repeated in my head, each syllable a drumbeat of humiliation and rage. Pregnant? And she had the audacity to tell me first, casually, as if it were news about the weather. I mumbled something clipped, meaningless, and retreated inside. Slamming the door with just enough force to rattle the glass, I leaned against it, sliding down to sit on the floor, the weight of disbelief pressing into me. My fingers dug into the carpet, nails scraping, and I felt the heat of tears threatening to burn my eyes. How could she be so bold, so meticulous, so cruel without ever seeming cruel? I imagined Claire peering through her windows, measuring my reaction, cataloging my discomfort as a trophy. My mind raced through every past interaction, every flirty joke Mark had laughed at, every lunch they'd shared, and I hated him for not seeing it, for not protecting me, for not even noticing the calculated precision of her invasion. I hated myself for letting it get under my skin, but most of all, I felt that raw, undeniable surge of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Anger, pure, unfiltered, simmering rage that demanded more than quiet resentment. It demanded action. I pressed my palms against my face again, breathing through the sudden heat in my chest. The knot in my stomach tightened, coiling like a spring. Could not be passive. Not anymore. I looked out the window at her house. She was arranging flowers in the front yard, smiling at the sky, blissfully unaware, perhaps fully aware of the storm she had unleashed. And I realized something that sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just about Claire moving in. This was about power, control, ownership of my own life and space. And she was claiming it, step by step. With a smile that was designed to wound, I rose slowly from the floor, knees stiff, hands trembling. The coffee had gone cold, the newspaper forgotten. I wiped my eyes and drew in a deep breath. I wasn't sure how yet, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't let Claire win. Not next door. Not in my life. Not in my marriage. The anger lingered, sweet and sharp, like tasting metal on your tongue. And I let it sharpen my focus, ignite my determination. This was just the beginning. The days that followed felt like living in a pressure cooker. Every glance out my kitchen window, every sound of footsteps on the driveway, sent my heart racing. Claire had an uncanny ability to make herself unavoidable. She waved when I walked the dog, smiling like the sun had just risen to honor her. She brought over baked goods, insisting, "I made way too much, Samantha. Hope you don't mind if I drop some off." I forced polite smiles each time, but inside, my teeth were grinding against one another. Each small gesture felt like a calculated shove, a reminder that she was encroaching on everything I held dear. Mark was blind to it, as usual. He laughed when I muttered under my breath about Claire's constant appearances. "Samantha, she's just trying to be friendly," he said one evening as we sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet space. "You're overthinking it," I wanted to scream. Friendly didn't buy the house next door with a smug smile and announce a pregnancy like it was a trophy. Friendly didn't linger in your peripheral vision and make you feel like a shadow in your own home. But I couldn't make him see it, not yet. I began noticing the little things Claire did, the things that most people would dismiss as coincidences. She timed her lawn mowing to coincide with my morning jogs. She asked Mark casual questions about me, phrased innocently, yet designed to make me uncomfortable. "Samantha's so dedicated at work, isn't she?" She said one afternoon when we all happened to be in the garage, her hands delicately adjusting the edges of a folded blanket. The way she said it, sweet, almost reverent, was infuriating. It felt like a knife sliding just under the rib cage. Twisting, I started spending nights awake, tracing over every interaction, dissecting every phrase Mark and Claire exchanged. I could feel my hair being pulled back from my face, tension knotting in my shoulders. Sometimes I caught myself replaying moments in my mind. Claire's laughter, a little too loud. The way Mark's eyes lit up when she said something clever. And the worst part, I realized I was obsessed. I couldn't stop analyzing, calculating, anticipating. I hated that I let her invade my mental space so completely. Our neighbors noticed something too. I could see them staring when Claire and I crossed paths, their expressions tight and curious. I imagined them whispering about the awkward exchanges, the forced smiles, the tension simmering in the air like a storm waiting to break. Claire seemed to thrive on it. She invited me over for coffee the first week she moved in, a neighborly gesture, and I went, unable to say no. She had the nerve to lean back in my own living room, feet crossed neatly, and casually drop little comments about her pregnancy. It's such a weird feeling, Samantha. I never knew my body could feel like this. I smiled, nodded, and drank my tea like it was medicine. Tasting bile with each sip, I caught Mark watching me, his expression full of concern that only made me want to throw something across the room. He thought I was being oversensitive. He didn't understand that Claire's presence was an invasion, a daily reminder of boundaries being crossed and respect being ignored. I realized then that part of me envied Claire her ability to move through the world so assuredly, claiming space, asserting attention, while I felt trapped in my own home. But that envy quickly morphed into something sharper, a need to fight back, to reclaim my life before it was slowly dismantled under the guise of neighborly friendliness. One evening, the breaking point arrived without warning. Claire had invited herself over for what she called a girls' night chat. Mark was out of town, and I thought perhaps I could handle a short visit. She arrived carrying wine and snacks, her posture casual, confident, like she owned my living room. We sat on my couch, and she leaned toward me with that infuriatingly perfect smile. I just can't stop thinking about how exciting everything is. The house, the baby, Mark's reaction, it's just perfect, isn't it? I felt my stomach tighten, my chest constrict, as if her words were pressing against my ribcage. Perfect. Nothing about this felt perfect to me. I tried to nod, offer a noncommittal smile, but I could feel my hands trembling slightly in my lap. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Claire had a talent for reading people, for finding their weaknesses and exploiting them with casual elegance. She laughed softly, leaning back. Oh, don't look so tense, Samantha. You should be happy for me. We're going to be neighbors forever. Won't it be fun? Fun? The word rolled over me like gravel in a shoe. I wanted to ask her if she had any idea how suffocating her presence already felt. But I knew I'd only sound petty, and she would win, always. I excused myself to the bathroom, my reflection in the mirror a stranger's face. Eyes wide, jaw tight, chest heaving. My thoughts raced faster than my heartbeat. How could she do this? How could Mark be so blind? And what could I do without looking ridiculous, overreacting, or worse, losing myself to rage? I leaned against the counter, gripping the sink until my knuckles whitened. A part of me considered confrontation, sharp and immediate. Another part told me to wait, observe, and plan. Observation was safer. Observation was power. Over the next few days, I followed that plan passively, but with a meticulous mental checklist. I watched Claire's comings and goings, her carefully timed errands, the way she subtly pried information from Mark. I noted patterns, little vulnerabilities. She had routines that could be anticipated. She had a pride that could be manipulated. The more I observed, the more I realized that this wasn't just about surviving her presence. This was about reclaiming my own space, my dignity, my life. Every evening, I felt the tension coiling tighter inside me, a spring ready to snap. I couldn't discuss it with Mark. He was too blind, too trusting. I couldn't confront Claire yet. She thrived on attention, and I needed to act strategically. The frustration was a heavy, constant pulse in my temples, an itch under my skin that demanded release. I started sleeping less, thinking more, imagining every possible scenario, small victories, subtle embarrassments, ways to expose her ego without looking petty myself. The breaking point came one afternoon, when she leaned over my fence as I watered the garden, her voice lilting, teasing, casual as if the world belonged to her. Samantha, you look tired. You should take better care of yourself. Don't work too hard while Mark's enjoying all this excitement. I felt my hands curl into fists, my fingernails digging into my palms. Excitement, her baby, my husband, my life, all twisted into one humiliating knot that felt like it would never untangle. I realized then that I had to do more than simmer silently. I had to act, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange exhilaration, a spark of determination that cut through the fog of humiliation. Claire's smirk would not define me. Her victory was not inevitable. I would watch, I would plan, and when the moment came, I would strike. I could taste it already. The sweet satisfaction of turning the tables as I retreated inside. Wiping my hands on my jeans, I felt the storm settle into a cold, focused calm. Observation was my weapon. Patience was my ally. And beneath the fear, beneath the anger, I felt a sense of clarity. I was no longer just a passive participant in this nightmare. I was preparing to reclaim my life, and Claire's perfect little world would not survive my quiet, deliberate plan. I didn't snap all at once. It wasn't some dramatic explosion with raised voices and slammed doors. It was quieter than that, more dangerous. It happened in fragments, accumulating like pressure behind my eyes until one ordinary afternoon made something inside me finally lock into place. Claire had invited herself to a neighborhood brunch she knew I was hosting. I hadn't told her. Mark must have mentioned it in passing. She showed up glowing, hands cradling her belly, soaking up attention like oxygen, and when she hugged me, her hand lingered just a second too long on my back. "You really bring people together, Samantha," she said softly, close enough that only I could hear. "Mark's lucky to have you holding things down." Holding things down. Like I was some background support beam. I smiled so hard my jaw ached, but inside something shifted. A click, I realized she wasn't guessing anymore. She knew exactly where she stood, and worse, she believed she was untouchable that night. After everyone left and Mark fell asleep within minutes, I lay awake staring at the dark, replaying every moment. The way she positioned herself next to him on the couch, the way her laugh rose just a little higher when he spoke, the way she watched me not with fear, but with curiosity, like I was something she'd already solved. I felt heat crawl up my neck, settle behind my ears. I pressed my palm to my chest, feeling my heart thudding hard, steady. That was the moment I stopped asking why she was doing this and started asking how. Once I allowed myself to think strategically, the fog lifted. Claire liked control. She liked admiration. She liked appearing generous and blameless while quietly steering the narrative. I started paying closer attention, not with dread anymore, but with intent. I noticed how often she talked about her pregnancy online, how she curated every detail for maximum sympathy. I noticed how she subtly emphasized her independence, how she framed herself as strong, successful, admired, and I noticed how deeply she needed Mark's validation, even when she pretended not to. I began keeping mental notes, dates, comments, patterns. She never missed a chance to be seen. She overshared selectively, always with witnesses. She assumed privacy where it benefited her and transparency where it earned praise. And she assumed I was too polite, too rattled, too invisible to challenge her. That assumption became my leverage. The breaking point came when she crossed a line she must have thought didn't exist. I was folding laundry when Mark came home quiet, distracted. He sat on the bed, rubbing his temples. "Claire's having a rough time," he said gently. My stomach dropped. She's stressed about doing everything alone. I told her we'd help however we can. We help. My hands froze around a towel. I looked up at him, really looked, and saw how sincere he was. How manipulated. How little he understood what he was volunteering. Something in me hardened. Not toward him surprisingly, but toward her. She was positioning herself as the fragile one now, the deserving one, the victim, and I saw the trajectory clearly for the first time. This wasn't about proximity. It was about replacement, slowly, cleanly, with plausible deniability. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I nodded and told Mark we'd talk later. Then I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub. My reflection stared back at me, eyes sharp, mouth set. I felt calm, focused. This wasn't about jealousy anymore. It was about boundaries she had erased and consequences she had never faced. I wasn't going to expose her with rage. I was going to let her expose herself. The plan didn't arrive fully formed. It unfolded over days, then nights. I remembered an offhand comment she'd made weeks earlier about how hard it was keeping up appearances at work, how exhausting it was to manage different versions of herself. I remembered the way she'd laughed too quickly when Mark mentioned HR policies once. And then it clicked. Her strength was performance. Her weakness was documentation. I started small. I became friendly, warmer. I stopped bristling. I complimented her nursery ideas. I asked about doctor appointments. I let her talk. And she did. She talked endlessly. About Mark, about work, about how people didn't understand how hard it was for her. I listened, nodding, storing every word carefully. She relaxed. She got sloppy. She assumed I was finally harmless. I made sure our conversations happened where they could be remembered, sometimes recorded, sometimes witnessed, always framed as concern. I asked questions that sounded supportive but invited her to reveal more than she should. That must be so hard, navigating everything at work right now. I don't know how you manage all that attention. She filled the silences eagerly, unaware she was building the foundation of her own collapse. At night, I replayed everything, heart steady, mind clear. I felt guilty sometimes, not for her, but for how calculated I'd become. This wasn't who I used to be. But then I remembered the way she'd smiled when she announced her pregnancy to me, the way she'd positioned herself beside my husband, inside my life, without asking. And the guilt evaporated. I wasn't destroying anything that hadn't already been corrupted. I was just removing the mask. The real turning point came when she trusted me enough to slip. She complained about someone at work, mocking their incompetence, mentioning things she shouldn't have known. Confidential things. I kept my expression neutral, my tone gentle, while something electric raced through me. This was it. Not revenge fueled by emotion, but accountability wrapped in truth. She had underestimated me. And that was her fatal mistake. I didn't rush. I organized. I backed up everything. I waited for the right moment, the one where her image mattered most, where exposure would be undeniable and clean. I watched her grow more confident, more careless, mistaking my calm for surrender. Standing at my kitchen window one evening, watching her lights glow next door, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness yet, but certainty. She thought she'd already won. She thought I was finished. She had no idea I was just getting started. The day I put the plan into motion, everything felt sharper. The air smelled sweeter, the sunlight brighter, and my heart beat slower, steady, measured. I had rehearsed every step in my head, turning every potential misstep over until I knew the terrain as well as I knew my own kitchen. Claire had spent months performing, projecting perfection, and I had spent months watching, listening, noting. Now it was time to let all that careful observation pay off. I started early in the morning, before Claire could stir into her routine. I brewed coffee, the aroma thick and comforting, and set my laptop on the dining table, open to an innocuous-looking spreadsheet I'd been pretending to update. Claire would never suspect that every casual glance, every question she had asked me, had been cataloged with timestamps and details. By the time she arrived for her usual morning neighborly chat, I was calm, composed, and waiting. "Good morning, Samantha," she called cheerfully as she stepped onto my porch, her hand brushing her belly. I smiled casually. "Morning, Claire. Come in for coffee." My voice was smooth, neutral, perfectly friendly. She nodded, unaware that the walls of my living room now felt like the stage of a trap I had built for her. We settled into the couches, the sunlight slanting through the windows, casting patterns across the hardwood. She launched immediately into updates about her pregnancy, her work, her plans for the baby's room. I nodded, interjected politely, never missing an opportunity to encourage her to speak more. She didn't notice my subtle shifts, a pen left deliberately in reach, a notebook open for notes, my phone discreetly recording snippets of conversation. "You know, Samantha," she said, leaning forward, eyes bright, "I just don't understand how Mark manages everything at work. I try to keep up, but it's exhausting. People expect so much." Her tone was light, but there was arrogance there, the kind that makes you assume immunity from consequences. She didn't know I had been archiving every word, every inflection, every boast. I smiled. "Sounds stressful. You really are amazing for handling it all." I kept my voice steady, encouraging, inviting. She poured out her pride, her complaints, her little confidences. Each one was another nail in the coffin I had been carefully constructing. By mid-morning, Claire was entirely unaware of the trap closing around her. I suggested we take a walk in the neighborhood, a chance to stretch and chat. She agreed, delighting in the exercise of controlling attention. Every step was calculated. I subtly guided her toward the corner where a small group of neighbors often gathered. Casual acquaintances who enjoyed gossip but rarely acted. Perfect witnesses. As we approached, I casually mentioned some of her workplace exploits she had boasted about over coffee, phrasing it as admiration. "I can't believe you managed the Henderson project all on your own. That's impressive." Her eyes lit up. "Oh, it was nothing. She began recounting details, oblivious to the fact that her words would be heard by several people nearby. I stayed silent, letting her speak, letting her boast. My stomach tightened with anticipation, but my exterior remained calm, collected. I watched as she relaxed, confident, believing herself untouchable. I had arranged for a few of our neighbors to be in exactly the right place, chatting and looking casually in our direction. Claire had no idea. Her mistake was subtle but devastating. In her casual recounting, she mentioned sensitive internal information about our company details she had no right to share, in a tone that made it sound boastful, like she was flaunting access and influence. One of the neighbors, a friend of Mark's from a community board, froze, recognition dawning on his face. Another nudged their spouse, eyebrows raised. I felt my heart thrum with controlled excitement. It was working. She was unraveling by her own hand. I said nothing, smiling softly, pretending to be caught up in her story. Her self-assured voice faltered for a brief moment as she noticed the stares, but she quickly regained composure, blithely explaining the details as though she were justified. I allowed it, letting her overexpose herself, every word adding weight to the eventual reveal. Then I nudged the conversation carefully toward Mark, casually dropping, "He must be proud. You've really impressed him with how you manage everything." Her head tilted slightly, a subtle signal of her ego swelling, and I knew it was time. "Actually," I said gently, almost hesitant, "I was wondering, you've mentioned a few things about work projects and internal strategies. Did you ever check whether it's appropriate to share that outside the company?" Her smile faltered, a flicker of panic flashing in her eyes. I let it linger. Not too long, just enough. Claire's voice became slightly defensive, sharp even, but still unpracticed. "Oh, Samantha, it's all fine. I mean, I only mention it casually. Nobody important hears it." I leaned forward slightly, not threatening, just calm. "That's good. You'd hate to get in trouble for something you thought was harmless." The words sounded innocent, the tone gentle, but she knew. And I knew. I let the next hour pass with careful precision, letting her overshare, letting neighbors glance knowingly, letting her project confidence while the seeds of her unraveling took root. By the time she returned home, she had the faintest crease between her brows, a subtle nervous energy she couldn't quite shake. She didn't know the full impact yet, but she would. That night, I watched quietly from the window as she typed furiously on her laptop, probably replaying every conversation, analyzing every smile and glance, trying to figure out what went wrong. I sipped my tea and felt a release, a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with cruelty. It was about reclaiming space, about seeing balance restored. She had assumed dominance, assumed my passivity, assumed her immunity. She had been wrong. Over the next few days, the dominoes fell quietly, almost imperceptibly. Claire's phone rang more often, HR inquiries quietly filtering back from her boasts. Work colleagues asked clarifying questions about things she had casually mentioned. The smile she wore in my driveway began to falter, replaced by tension she couldn't disguise. Neighbors who once waved at her cheerfully now glanced with knowing expressions, their demeanor polite but edged with judgment. Mark noticed first, though not immediately. One evening, he leaned against the kitchen counter, rubbing his temple. "She's getting a lot of calls from work. HR?" Apparently, his voice was uncertain, hesitant. I didn't think I cut him off gently. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "I think she might have shared too much, Mark. Maybe it's a lesson in boundaries." He frowned, confused, and I let it stay that way. The next week, Claire came over again, attempting her usual charm. This time, her voice carried an edge of caution, the effortless confidence slightly cracked. She laughed less, flinched at small corrections, and avoided the neighbors who had silently witnessed her overreach. She didn't meet my eyes like she used to, didn't linger in my presence with that calculated ease. It was subtle, but I noticed every tremor, every hesitation. Every detail was a victory. By the end of the month, the transformation was complete. Claire's careful image of perfection had frayed, her ego punctured by exposure she had built herself. The pregnant neighbor who had once gleamed with impunity now moved cautiously, aware that her audience was wider than she realized, and that her manipulations no longer held weight. And I felt light, grounded, finally in control of my own space, my life, and my dignity. I poured a glass of wine that night, leaning against the window as I watched the house next door. Claire was inside, typing, glancing at the windows occasionally as though expecting judgment. She would not undo what had been set in motion. She would not reclaim her imagined dominance. The storm she had attempted to unleash in my life had backfired, and for the first time in months, I felt whole, triumphant. The days after Claire's unraveling were almost surreal in their calm. The neighborhood returned to its quiet rhythm, birdsong filling the mornings, the familiar hum of cars driving past, children laughing in the distance. But for me, everything felt sharper, brighter, as if I had been holding my breath for months and had finally exhaled. I watched the house next door from my kitchen window, noting the subtle shifts in Claire's behavior, the careful way she moved, the tension in her posture, the avoidance in her eyes when our gazes met. She was no longer the untouchable figure she once seemed. Mark noticed it too, though in his slow, uncomprehending way. One evening, as we tidied the kitchen together, he muttered something about how quiet the neighborhood felt, and I caught him glancing toward Claire's house. "She's different, isn't she?" he said, voice uncertain. I smiled faintly, not gloating, but satisfied. "Maybe she's learning what boundaries mean," I replied, and he nodded, oblivious to the full extent of what had transpired. The look of confusion and curiosity on his face made me feel a pang of amusement. He had never understood her manipulations, but he was beginning, subtly. to sense the imbalance she had created and how it had been corrected. The shift in Claire was gradual but unmistakable. She stopped dropping by unannounced. Her conversations became guarded, her laughter less effortless, more measured. Even when Mark was present, she hesitated, choosing her words with care rather than charm. I watched from a distance as the aura of confidence that had so infuriated me slowly crumbled, replaced by caution and self-consciousness. There was a certain poetic justice in watching her realize that performance alone could not shield her from accountability. I began reclaiming parts of my life that had felt overshadowed. Afternoon walks no longer felt like surveillance missions. They became a pleasure again. Evenings spent reading or gardening felt like claiming territory that had been quietly encroached upon. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a freedom that came not from vengeance alone, but from recognition that I had acted strategically and restored the equilibrium that had been threatened. The house next door no longer loomed like an invasion. It existed as part of the landscape, but one that no longer threatened me. Mark began noticing changes too, though subtly. He smiled more at me during breakfast, lingered in conversations, even asked about my day with genuine curiosity rather than distracted habit. He hadn't admitted awareness of Claire's unraveling, and I didn't need him to. His small shifts in attention were proof that our connection, which had been strained under the shadow of Claire's presence, was beginning to restore itself, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like a partner again. Not just a silent observer of someone else's manipulation. Neighborhood dynamics adjusted as well. People who had previously regarded Claire with casual admiration now seemed wary, curious, respectful of the boundaries she had overstepped. I noticed subtle nods of recognition from neighbors, smiles that acknowledged the quiet power shift that had taken place. No words were needed. The air itself carried the sense of justice, of balance restored. Claire's carefully constructed image of perfection had been punctured, and everyone could sense it. I reflected on the months of tension, observation, and planning, and realized that the process had changed me. I was sharper, more attuned, more confident in asserting what was mine. The anger that had fueled me had transformed into clarity, strategic thinking, and calm assurance. I had acted not out of petty spite, but from a place of necessity, to protect my life, my home, and my dignity. That realization brought a deep, satisfying sense of self-respect. Claire's attempts to regain influence grew more tentative. One morning, she waved from her porch, a half-hearted smile plastered on her face, and I returned the gesture politely, but without warmth. She caught the absence of enthusiasm, and her gaze flickered for just a moment. Betraying a flash of recognition, she knew the game had changed. No longer could she invade my life with impunity. Every calculated smile, every carefully staged charm had lost its potency. She had overplayed her hand, and I had countered with patience and precision. Mark eventually asked me about the tension between us and Claire. I chose my words carefully. "She's learning boundaries," I said, lightly, with a faint smile. He looked puzzled but accepted the explanation. I didn't need him to fully understand the orchestration, just to witness the change. The power dynamic had shifted, subtly but irrevocably, and that was enough. One evening, as I tended to my garden, Claire emerged from her house, careful in her movements, cautious in her greetings. She spoke briefly about something mundane, almost as if testing the waters before retreating back inside. I watched her go, noting the slump in her shoulders, the subtle anxiety in her walk. My chest swelled with a quiet triumph, not cruelty. Not gloating, but a profound sense of validation. Her arrogance, her manipulations, her sense of entitlement had been exposed. And I had not only endured, but orchestrated her unraveling. The sense of relief was immediate and intoxicating. I breathed deeply, feeling the air fill my lungs with a richness that had been absent during the months of tension. The quiet of the neighborhood, the rustle of leaves, the hum of life resuming its ordinary rhythm, it all felt earned. I allowed myself to savor the moment, a slow, steady acknowledgement of the months of struggle, observation, and careful action. I also reflected on Mark, who had remained mostly oblivious yet had contributed, in his way, to the clarity of my position. His unawareness had forced me to rely on my own instincts, to trust in my judgment, and to act decisively. The situation had revealed not only Claire's flaws but also the strengths I hadn't fully acknowledged in myself. I felt a new sense of autonomy, a realization that I was capable of protecting my life, my family, and my dignity without waiting for validation from anyone else. In quiet moments, I allowed myself to feel pride. Not a loud, boastful pride, but a steady, deep-rooted satisfaction. I had navigated manipulation, intrusion, and humiliation, and emerged not just unscathed, but stronger. I had witnessed justice unfold not through confrontation alone, but through observation, strategy, and patience. Claire had set her own trap, and I had merely guided her toward it. The result was clean, precise, and ultimately fair. As weeks passed, the atmosphere in the neighborhood normalized. Claire's carefully curated image of perfection dissolved into cautious respectability. She no longer assumed she could cross boundaries with impunity. Mark and I rediscovered small joys, shared mornings with coffee, laughter over dinner, the comfort of mutual attention that had been strained by her presence. My home regained its sanctity, and the space next door, though still occupied by Claire, felt neutral rather than threatening. One evening, I stood by the window, watching the sunset cast a golden glow across both properties. Claire was inside, visibly tense, while I moved freely in my garden, my hands deep in the soil, my chest light. The contrast between us was stark. I felt the culmination of months of tension, strategy, and emotional endurance crystallize into one perfect sense of closure. I had reclaimed my life, my space, and my power. And in that moment, I understood a simple truth about life, about justice, about the quiet strength that comes from resilience. Karma is not always loud, and revenge is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is subtle, strategic, and precise. Sometimes it is built in silence, observed patiently, and executed with unwavering clarity. And when it unfolds, it is more satisfying than any shout, any confrontation, any moment of immediate gratification. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled on the patio, feeling the cool evening breeze against my skin. The sky blazed with color, orange fading into purple, and I felt a profound sense of peace. Claire had learned her lesson without me needing to raise my voice. Mark had returned his attention to me without argument or guilt. The balance had been restored, and for the first time in months, I felt whole, empowered, and quietly triumphant. Life continued, predictable and steady, but I knew I had changed. I had learned the power of patience, of observation, and of standing firmly in my own worth. Claire was still next door, but she no longer mattered in the same way. The threat she had posed had dissolved, replaced by the knowledge that I could defend my life, my space, and my dignity with clarity and intelligence. And as I raised my glass to the sky, watching the last rays of sun dip below the horizon, I allowed myself a small, private smile. Justice had not only been served, had been earned cleanly and deliberately, and in that, I found something rare, the quiet, unshakable satisfaction of a life reclaimed.